Astronauts with guns, the truth revealed. Imagine an astronaut, a spacesuit, a helmet, a mission to the stars. They're explorers, pioneers, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. But what if I told you that some astronauts have actually carried guns? Today we're strapping ourselves in for a wild ride as we uncover the surprising reality of weapons in space. Let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the lack of an elephant, and a gun. No, NASA astronauts do not carry guns in space. It's just not part of their mission. Think about it. The International Space Station, where most astronauts spend their time, is a marvel of international cooperation. Bringing weapons into that environment would be a huge step backward. Now I know what you might be thinking, but Neil, what about self-defense? What if something happens up there? Well, space is inherently dangerous, yes, but the threats aren't quite what Hollywood would have you believe. We're talking micrometeoroids, radiation, the vacuum of space itself, not hostile aliens or space pirates. NASA's approach to space exploration has always been focused on peace and scientific discovery. Their tools are telescopes, robotic arms, and scientific instruments, not firearms. The bottom line is, in the entire history of space exploration, there has never been a recorded incident of an astronaut needing a weapon in space. Alright, I confess that NASA astronauts don't pack heat, but what about their counterparts from the other side of the Iron Curtain? Well, things get a little more interesting when we turn our attention to the history of Soviet space exploration. Because, believe it or not, Soviet cosmonauts did carry guns, but not for the reasons you might think. This wasn't about fighting off extraterrestrial invaders or engaging in orbital skirmishes. It was about survival, plain and simple. See, unlike NASA missions that typically ended with a splashdown in the ocean, Soviet cosmonauts often returned to Earth by landing in remote, and I mean remote, areas of the vast Siberian wilderness. And in 1965, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov had an experience that led the Soviets to rethink their approach to post-landing safety. Leonov, after becoming the first human to walk in space, found himself stranded in the Siberian wilderness for 2 long days after his spacecraft landed off course. Surrounded by wild animals, bears, wolves, you name it, Leonov was in a precarious situation to say the least. This incident made the Soviets realize that their cosmonauts needed a more persuasive means of self-defense after landing. Enter the TP-82 survival pistol, a unique firearm designed specifically for cosmonauts. The TP-82's stock wasn't just a stock. It actually unfolded to reveal a machete because why not be prepared for every eventuality when you're landing in the middle of nowhere? Now, for a question that's been plaguing curious minds for decades, could guns even work in the vacuum of space? The answer, surprisingly, is yes. Despite what some science fiction movies might have you believe, bullets don't need oxygen to fire. You see, gunpowder, or more specifically, the propellant in a bullet cartridge, contains its own oxidizer. This means that a firearm can function perfectly well in the airless environment of space. But, and this is a big but, there's a fundamental law of physics that makes firing a gun in space a very different experience than here on Earth. Newton's third law of motion. Remember, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So, if you were to fire a gun in the microgravity of space, the bullet would indeed shoot forward, propelled by the expanding gases from the gunpowder. However, you, the shooter, would experience an equal and opposite force, sending you hurtling backward. Imagine that. A single shot could send an astronaut tumbling uncontrollably through the void. So, while a gun might technically fire in space, the consequences of pulling the trigger would be far more dramatic and potentially disastrous than in any Hollywood action flick. While our focus has been on astronauts and their lack of personal firearms, it's time to address the elephant in the space station. Because while no astronaut has ever carried a weapon for combat in space, governments haven't been shy about developing weapons space. The Cold War, that era of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, saw both superpowers pouring resources into space weaponry. Satellites, initially conceived for communication and observation, were quickly militarized. We're talking spy satellites equipped with high-resolution cameras capable of peering into enemy territory, and early warning satellites designed to detect missile launches, giving precious minutes of notice in the event of a nuclear attack. Both the US and the Soviet Union experimented with laser weapon systems, aiming to harness the power of directed energy to destroy enemy missiles and satellites. And if that weren't enough, the Soviets even went so far as to develop a space cannon, a real functional cannon mounted on a satellite. Thankfully, this weapon never progressed beyond the testing phase. So, while the thought of astronauts engaging in firefights might seem like the stuff of science fiction, the reality is that space has been entangled in military strategy for decades. Thankfully, the International Space Station stands as a testament to how far we've come since the days of the Cold War. The ISS isn't just a technological marvel, it's a symbol of international cooperation, a shining example of what humanity can achieve when we work together. Bringing weapons onto the ISS would be a colossal step backward, undermining the very principles of peace and collaboration that the station represents. Instead of relying on weapons, astronauts on the ISS rely on something far more powerful: diplomacy. The ISS has strict protocols in place to handle any disagreements or conflicts that might arise between crew members. These protocols emphasize communication, understanding, and finding peaceful resolutions. They're chosen not only for their scientific expertise but also for their ability to work effectively as part of a team, even under pressure. In the end, the best defense in space, as here on Earth, is to prevent situations from escalating to the point where violence becomes an option. So, what did we learn today? NASA astronauts do not carry guns, there's no need for them. The ISS is a place of science and cooperation, not shootouts. Soviet cosmonauts once carried survival guns, but only for protection after landing on Earth, proving that sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. And while guns could technically fire in space, the laws of physics would make it a very, very bad idea. What do you think? Should astronauts have weapons just in case, or is space better off gun-free? Let us know in the comments. And as always, keep looking up, but keep it peaceful. Don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing space facts, deep dives, and cosmic mysteries.